Hello everybody and welcome back to Law and Court Cases, and in today's video we'll be covering the case of one of the most prolific serial killers in modern day history. With an estimated 250 victims, he was known as Dr. Death, but his name was Dr. Harold Shipman. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on the 14th of January in 1946 on a council estate in Nottingham. The second of three children, his father, also Harold Frederick Shipman, was a lorry driver and his mother was Vera. His working-class parents were devout Methodists. When growing up, Shipman was an accomplished rugby player in youth leagues. He passed his 11 plus in 1957, moving to High Pavement Grammar School in Nottingham. He left there in 1964. He excelled as a distance runner and in his final years of school served as vice-captain of the athletics team. Shipman was particularly close to his mother, who died of lung cancer when he was age 17. Her death came in a manner similar to what would later become Shipman's own MO. In the later stages of her disease, she had a morphine drip administered at home by a doctor. Shipman witnessed his mother's pain subside despite her terminal condition until her death on the 21st of June in 1963. On the 5th of November 1966, he married Primrose May Oxby. The couple had 4 children. Shipman went on to study medicine at the Leeds School of Medicine, the University of Leeds, and graduated in 1970. Harold began working at Pontefract General Infirmary in Pontefract, West Riding of Yorkshire, and in 1974 he took his first position as a GP. The following year, Shipman was caught forging prescriptions of pethidine for his own use. He was fined £600 and briefly attended a drug rehabilitation clinic in York. He worked as a GP at Donnybrook Medical Centre in Hyde, Greater Manchester in 1977. Shipman continued working as a GP in Hyde throughout the 1980s and established his own surgery at 21 Market Street in 1993. He became a respected member of his community. In March 1998, Dr. Linda Reynolds of the Brook Surgery in Hyde expressed concern to John Pollard, the coroner for the South Manchester district, about the high death rate among Shipman's patients. In particular, she was concerned about the large number of cremation forms for elderly women that he had asked for her to countersign. Police were unable to find a sufficient amount of evidence to bring charges and close the investigation on the 17th of April. The Shipman inquiry later blamed Greater Manchester Police for assigning inexperienced officers to the case. After the investigation was closed, Shipman killed 3 more people. A few months later, in August, a taxi driver by the name of John Shaw told the police that he suspected Shipman of murdering 21 patients. Shaw became suspicious of many of the elderly customers he took to the hospital, while seemingly in good health, died in Shipman's care. Shipman's last victim was Kathleen Grundy, a former mayor of Hyde, who was found dead at her home on the 24th of June 1998. He was the last person to see her alive. He later signed her death certificate, recording the cause of death as old age. Grundy's daughter, solicitor Angela Woodruff, became concerned when fellow solicitors Brian Burgess informed her that the will had been made, apparently by her mother, with doubts about its authenticity. The will excluded Woodruff and her children, but left £386,000 to Shipman. At Burgess' urging, Woodruff went to the police, who began an investigation. Grundy's body was exhumed and found to contain traces of diamorphine, or heroin, often used for pain control in terminal cancer patients. Shipman claimed that Grundy had been an addict and showed then comments that he had written down to this effect in his computerized medical journal. However, the police examined his computer and showed that the entries were written after her death. Shipman was arrested on the 7th of September in 1998. He was found to own a Brother typewriter. It was the same type that was used to forge the will. Prescription for Murder, a 2000s book written by journalists Brian Whittle and Jean Ritchie, suggested that Shipman forged the will either because he wanted to be caught because his life was out of control, or because he planned to retire at 55 and leave the UK. The police investigated other deaths that Shipman had certified and investigated 15 specimen cases. They discovered a pattern of him administering lethal doses of diamorphine, signing patient death certificates, and then falsifying medical records to indicate that they had been in poor health. Shipman's trial began at Preston Crown Court on the 5th of October in 1998. He was charged with the murder of 15 women by lethal injection of diamorphine, all between 1995 and 1998. Their names were Marie West, Irene Turner, Lizzie Adams, Jean Lilly, Ivy Lomas, Muriel Grimshaw, Marie Quinn, Kathleen Wagstaff, Bianca Pomfret, Nora Nuttall, Pamela Hillier, Maureen Ward, Winifred Meller, Joe Melia, and Kathleen Grundy. On the 31st of January in 2000, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury found Shipman guilty of all 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. Mr. Justice Forbes subsequently sentenced Shipman to life imprisonment on all 15 counts of murder, with a recommendation that he be subject to a whole life tariff, to be served concurrently with a sentence of 4 years for forging Grundy's will. On the 11th of February, 11 days after his conviction, Shipman was struck off the medical register by the General Medical Council, or the GMC. 2 years later, Home Secretary David Blunkett confirmed the judge's whole life tariff, just months before British government ministers lost their power to set minimum terms for prisoners. While authorities could have brought many more additional charges, they concluded that a fair hearing would be impossible in view of the enormous publicity surrounding the original trial. Furthermore, the 15 life sentences sentenced him to what he would have received regardless of the amount of deaths. Despite this, Shipman denied his guilt, disputing the scientific evidence against him. He never made any public statements about his actions. Shipman's wife Primrose maintained he was not guilty, even after his conviction. Clearly, Primrose was not a victim of Shipman's plan to murder hundreds of people, but she was a victim of his gaslighting techniques. Shipman is the only doctor in the history of British medicine found guilty of murdering his patients. On the 13th of January 2004, at 6:20 a.m, Shipman hanged himself in his cell at HM Prison Wakeford, at the age of 57. He was pronounced dead at 8:10 a.m. A statement from His Majesty's Prison Service indicated that he had hanged himself from the window bars of his cell using his bedsheets. After Shipman's death, his body was taken to the mortuary at the Medico-Legal Centre in Sheffield by undertaker's van for a post-mortem examination. West Yorkshire coroner David Hinchliffe eventually released the body to his family after an inquest was opened and adjourned shortly after. Understandably, some of the victims' families said they felt cheated, as Shipman's suicide meant they would never have the satisfaction of a confession, nor answers as to why he committed his crimes. Home Secretary David Blunkett admitted that celebrating was tempting. You wake up and you receive a call telling you Shipman has topped himself and you think, is it too early to open a bottle? Then you discover that everybody's very upset that he's done it. Shipman's death divided national newspapers. The Daily Mirror branded him a cold coward and condemned the prison service for allowing his suicide to happen. However, The Sun ran a celebratory front-page headline, "Ship, ship, hooray." The Independent called for the inquiry into Shipman's suicide to look more widely at the state of UK prisons, as well as the welfare of inmates. Shipman's motive for suicide was never established, though he reportedly told his probation officer that he was considering suicide to assure his wife's financial security after he was stripped of his National Health Service pension. Primrose Shipman still received a full NHS pension. She would not be entitled to it if Shipman had lived past the age of 60. Additionally, there was evidence that Primrose, who had coincidentally protested Shipman's innocence, despite the overwhelming evidence, had begun to suspect her guilt. Shipman refused to take part in courses which had encouraged acknowledgement of his crimes, leading to a temporary removal of the privileges, including the opportunity to telephone his wife. Additionally, there was evidence that Primrose, despite her continuous protesting that Shipman was innocent, it was clear that even she had begun to suspect his guilt. During the period that he was in prison, according to Shipman's cellmate, he received a letter from Primrose exonerating him to tell me everything, no matter what. A 2005 inquiry found that Shipman's suicide could not have been predicted or prevented, but that procedures would nonetheless be re-examined. After Shipman's body was released to his family, it remained in Sheffield for more than a year, despite multiple false reports about his funeral. His widow was advised by police against burying her husband in case the grave was attacked. Shipman was eventually cremated on the 19th of March 2005 at Hutcliffe Wood Crematorium. The cremation took place outside of normal working hours to maintain secrecy and was attended by only Primrose and the couple's 4 children. In January of 2001, Chris Gregg, a senior West Yorkshire police detective, was selected to lead an investigation into 22 of the West Yorkshire deaths. Following this, the Shipman inquiry submitted in July 2002 concluded that he had killed at least 218 of his patients between 1975 and 1998, during which time he practiced at Todmorden in 1974 to 1975 and Hyde in 1977 to 1998. Janet Smith, the judge who submitted the report, admitted that many more deaths of the suspicious nature could not be definitively ascribed to Shipman. Most of his victims were elderly women in good health. In her sixth and final report, issued on the 24th of January in 2005, Smith reported that she believed that Shipman had killed 3 patients and that she had serious suspicions about 4 other deaths, including that of a 4-year-old girl, during the early stages of his medical career at Pontefract General Infirmary. In total, 459 people died whilst under his care between 1971 and 1998. It is uncertain how many of those were murder victims, as he was often the doctor to certify a death. Smith's estimate of Shipman's total victims counted over the 27-year period was 250 victims. The GMC charged 6 doctors who signed cremation forms from Shipman's victims with misconduct, claiming they would have noticed the pattern between Shipman's home visits and his patients' deaths. All these doctors were found not guilty. The Shipman inquiry recommended charges to the structure of the GMC. In 2005, it came to light that Shipman may have stolen jewellery from his victims. In 1998, police had seized over £10,000 worth of jewellery that were found in his garage. In March of 2005, when Primrose asked for its return, police wrote that the families of Shipman's victims asked them to identify the jewellery. Unidentified items were handed to the Assets Recovery Agency in May. The investigation ended in August. Authorities returned 66 pieces to Primrose and auctioned 33 pieces that she confirmed were not hers. Proceeds from the auction went to Tameside victim support. The only piece returned to a murdered patient's family was a platinum diamond ring, for which the family provided proof of a photograph of the ownership. Clearly, I would not doubt that most of these items were in fact trophies that Shipman took from his victims as a keepsake or as something to remember them by, so he could relive the crimes. And it just kind of disgusts me that Primrose wanted them back. A memorial garden for Shipman's victims called the Garden of Tranquility opened in Hyde Park in Hyde on the 30th of July 2005. As of early 2009, families of over 200 of the victims of Shipman's were still seeking compensation for the loss of their relatives, understandably so. In September of 2009, letters Shipman wrote in prison to friends were to be sold at auction, but following complaints from the victims' relatives and the media, the sale was withdrawn. The Shipman case was a series of recommendations in the Shipman Inquiry report. It led to changes of standard medical procedures in the UK, now referred to as the Shipman effect. Many doctors reported changes to their dispensing practice, and the reluctance to risk overprescribing pain medication may lead to underprescribing. Death certification practice was altered as well. Perhaps the largest change was the movement from single doctor general practice and multiple doctor general practices. This was not a direct recommendation, but rather because the report stated that there was not enough safeguarding and monitoring of doctors' decisions. The forms needed for cremation in England and Wales have had their questions altered as a direct result of Shipman's case. For example, the person organising the funeral must answer, do you know or suspect that the death of the person who has died was violent or unnatural? Do you consider that there should be any further examination of the remains of the person who has died? This was the story of Harold Shipman. My deepest condolences go out to the families affected by this awful human being, and I hope they find peace. Thank you so much for sticking around, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.